Hi everyone, my name is Chris Yules and I'm going to be talking through with you 5 tips to improve your teaching of story writing. So number 1 is going to be looking at the rules of storytelling and why they matter. Number 2, I'm going to be looking at the point of view, why it matters and how to teach it. Number 3, I'm going to be looking at characters and goals. Number 4, I'm going to be looking at struggle, conflict and stuff getting in the way of goals. And number 5, how to teach the writing bit. Number 1, the rules of storytelling. There are hundreds and hundreds of books on storytelling or on plot or on story, written by famous authors, screenwriters, TV writers, and you could spend years researching this up to a very high level. But why do they matter when we're teaching primary school or secondary school creative writing? Well, let's have a think about what we are asked to teach, what we are asked to teach through our curriculum, versus what actually makes good writing. Now, if we got out the list here, you can see lots of different spelling rules, which I think are important. And I can see lots of grammar and tense rules and lots of things that are actually going to make my writing cohesive and easier to read for my reader, which is actually really, really important. And I'm not saying not to teach these things. However, are these actually what make a good story? Now, if I think about what I was doing in my classroom, I was teaching each of these in sequence in a linear manner. And I remember one student saying to me at one point, "Oh, I wish I could just write setting descriptions all the time." And I asked her why. And she said, "Well, because I know what I'm doing for a setting description, but as soon as I try to actually write a story, I get confused." And it was like a light bulb moment. And I realized that for all that time I've been doing it wrong, because at no point have I actually taught her how does a story work? How does an author craft a story? What are the rules of storytelling? Fine, I could go through and grab my highlighter pen, as I used to actually have to do with hundreds of sheets, and highlight all these different areas. But really, the key here is to write an engaging or an entertaining story. And that actually needs a lot of unpacking, and it needs a lot of subject knowledge. If you think about what actually makes a good story, I've listed some of the ideas here. So pacing, how and when to slow down or speed up. Writing action sequences, writing descriptions through a point of view. Characterization through point of view. Suspense and struggle, conflict and tension, setting and world building, plot structure, dialogue. And all of these things are here. However, actually, although they might be alluded to in the curriculums that we teach from, they aren't unpacked. They aren't laid out in a manner in which that we can teach students of different ages. So let's have a look at an example of a story. I wrote this, but it was inspired by a very popular, fantastic comparative judgment writing website that I use in my school, and I've read many stories from students of all ages, and this inspired me to write this one. 3 people went to explore a cave. Their names were George, Susan and Tom. In the cave they saw some bats. They were trapped in the cave. This is scary, he thought. 2 of the people saw some snakes in the cave. Look at that snake. I know. One of the people was scared of snakes, but one of them liked it, so they picked the snake up. Then the shark came. They both screamed, "Ah!" The shark stared at them and thought about eating them. Yum yum, it thought. And then an octopus came, and a whale. The end. Now, quite often I've shared this piece of writing with students and with teachers, and they've always given me the same feedback. I've always asked, why has this not worked? And actually it's always been exactly the same words, from the students of 7 years old up to the educators of I don't know how old. And the word they've already used is, "It's boring." But let's have a look again. Snakes, caves, sharks, octopus. It's not boring, it's terribly exciting. There was a point at which Netflix would have thrown $100 million at this and snapped up the series rights. It isn't the reason it doesn't work. It's not because it's boring. It doesn't work because it has an unclear viewpoint and tense. There are no character goals, so there's nothing that any of the characters want. There are no obstacles, so even if they had a goal, there's nothing getting them in the way of that goal. Yes, fine, you might say there's snakes and sharks and octopuses, but what are they actually standing in front of? What are they stopping the characters doing? There's no stakes or struggles. There's no logical cause and effect, which makes it quite hard to read. And there's no understanding of point of view, character or setting or dialogue. Number 2, point of view, why it matters, and how to teach it. So what is a point of view in writing? A point of view isn't just a grammatical distinction between the pronouns we pick. Of course, they're vitally important. If I want to write in the first person, I'd use I, second person you, and third person he or she or they. Now, quite often, this is the limited view I find that teachers have when they're picking a point of view. So what I mean by that is I have asked teachers before, why are you choosing to write this story with your class in the first person? And the answer has been, well, last time we wrote in the third person. However, the point of view has a much more fundamental and seismic shift on everything to do with the story rather than just picking it because we didn't do it last time. It is our space or angle of vision for the entire story that's being told. There's different types of point of view, which is the first person, so that's I. This is the point of view where you're inside the character's head. It's one of the hardest point of views to write because although you have unlimited access to be inside that character's head, the hard thing about that is also that you have unlimited access to be inside that character's head. So therefore it can end up sounding and reading like some sort of teenage diary. Second person is the you, and actually this is quite a unique and very rarely used person to write in. You might know it well if you were like me when you were a kid and you used to really like those adventure books, like you wake up in a cell, what do you do? And the third person is the most common and actually the easiest person to write in. However, there are some different types of third person writing: omniscient, limited shifting, and objective. So viewpoint is the single most important decision that you will make as a writer. Therefore, it is also one of the most important decisions that you will make as a teacher, what point of view you're going to teach your students to write in and how you're going to explain this to your students. Now, I've built this as a simple map here where you can see that you have a writer, then you have the point of view, and then the story. So the story we are revealed to and told it through the point of view of the character that we choose to tell that story. Then the reader experiences the story through that character's point of view. So you can see here at the bottom we've got the writer and then the story with the point of view in the middle. It's the filter through which we're going to experience this story. So here's an example from this fantastic book called Tiger. And you can see here, it was the week before midwinter. The rain was lashing down and the narrow streets of Soho were deep with puddles. Although it was midday, the sky over London was iron grey. Clouds of smoke hung heavy up above as always. Adam Alhambra wasn't looking at that bleak midwinter sky. He was looking at the checkpoint up ahead of him and shivering. He huddled into his coat, but the wind cut through it like a whip. And that wasn't the only thing that made him feel cold. He could see the soldier there, behind the metal bars and railings. He could hear his stern voice, turning people back from the boundary that separated Soho from the rest of London. Now you can clearly see this is told in the third person, and it's from the viewpoint or point of view of this character called Adam. Now this makes a huge difference because then everything to do with the setting and the characters that we have in this scene are from Adam's point of view, and that helps us with the characterization, helps us build atmosphere, and it also starts to give us, as the reader experiencing the story from his point of view, some clues as to his feelings or the negative aspects that are going on in this scene. So for example, let's have a look at the setting. The rain was lashing down, narrow streets, deep puddles, clouds of smoke, iron grey, bleak midwinter sky. Everything about that setting shows us that as Adam moves into it, something about the way that his character feels about it. Now, setting, well-known writing tips, is often said is something that is activated by point of view, that is brought to life by point of view. Now, you might often work with students who write very long purple prose setting descriptions with lots and lots of adjectives and descriptions in because they haven't really thought about the point of view or what the purpose is. And you can see here the purpose of this setting is to show us that Adam is not comfortable, he's not happy, this is a foreboding, ominous scene that he's moving into. Now this is the same when actually we look at the character here. The other character in this scene is the soldier. Now what do we know about the soldier? He's at a checkpoint, and we can see that the soldier's behind metal bars and railings. He's got a stern voice, and we can hear his goal here, which is turning people back from the boundary. Once again, this character is there to not just reveal a little bit of the story, so we've got a checkpoint and a boundary and we know he's turning people away, but it's also to show us how Adam feels about this soldier as he's moving towards it. And then as a reader, as I'm experiencing this story, I can start to infer that perhaps that this is going to be a problem for Adam in the story. Now, viewpoint is the single most important decision you will make as a writer. Let's have a look at 2 quick examples. I walked into the hall and froze in horror when I spotted the words "icebreaker" on the big screen. I slumped in my seat and avoided eye contact with the woman delivering the training. Then, Mr. Smith appeared at my table with a huge grin. Typical. He loves these sorts of things. Any chance for him to show off, and he's there in a flash. Now you can see I've written this from my point of view as a person who hates icebreakers. And once again, you can see everything about the setting and the characters and the experience and the thoughts and the feelings from my point of view are of sheer horror at being forced into this awful icebreaker. Now if I switch the point of view or the viewpoint, this is also going to change everything. Let's have a look. I walked into the hall and my heart sang when I spotted the words "icebreaker" on the screen. I sat in my seat and tried to get eye contact with the woman delivering the training. Mr. Yules was sat at my table, slumped down and doing everything he could to get out of it. What a grump. Doesn't he know this is our chance to shine? So you can see here how this has changed everything. It's changed the view of the other character, me this time, changed my vocabulary choices, changed everything about the feeling and the setting. So viewpoint is vital, and it's something that we really need to teach to students. I mean, it's something we need them to get to think of when they're writing and planning and editing and through every part of the story writing process. It changes the way the reader experiences the scene. It's changed our view of the other character, the setting, the feelings, the thoughts. Viewpoint changed everything. But you might still think, well, why does this matter if we don't choose a point of view? Well, it can also lead to several critical writing problems. One of these is something called head hopping, and this is where the writer accidentally jumps from one character's point of view to another character's point of view, sometimes even mid-sentence, so that your reader becomes confused. It also can lead to an unclear main character. If you think of that story example I used earlier, we had no idea whose story that was. And it also leads to uncontrolled switches to the omniscient point of view. So this is when the narrator or the writer jumps in and tells you little facts or ideas or parts of the story about characters and settings. This is really common and something I see students do a lot without control, because they read a lot of stories in which the author does this with control and they're trying to imitate it. Now this is something you could teach, but it needs to be done in a way where they're really clear about how and why they're using it. Here's an example of head hopping. George walked up the long path to the house. Why was this so-called house of death? The house that everyone in the village had warned him against? Dr. Acula, that's Dracula, walked down the corridor of his house to the front door. Then he peeked through the keyhole of the door. What shall I do? He thought to himself. The door was smashed open and he grabbed him by the shirt. So you can see here I've purposely jumped from George's point of view to Dr. Acula's point of view, and the result is confusion for the reader. Next, characters. What do they want? Goals, and why is this important? I love this quote by Kurt Vonnegut. Every character should want something, even if it is only a glass of water. So, characters. What do they want? In this writing, we call this goals. It's the thing that they're after. But why is this important? So if we're thinking about goals, then we have to have a character's goals to have obstacles, things that get in the way of the goals. We also then have to have a struggle, which means we make it hard for our characters to achieve those goals. And then we get the payoff. And the reason we read is for the payoff. Because what we really like as readers and as human beings and people who experience stories and storytelling since the birth of time is that we like to see our characters aiming for something, things getting in their way, it being really hard to get there, and then they succeed. Let's have a look at this. Jack ran around the corner and saw the vampire. He killed the vampire and got the secret goblet. The end. Now, I guess he had a goal, which was to get the secret goblet, and he did have an obstacle, which was the vampire. But there's no struggle, so therefore the payoff is weak and it's not interesting for me as a reader. Now you might be again thinking, wow, this is a bit too complicated, but students do know about goals. I checked this out. I put up this image of all these different Disney films in my class, and I asked my class, what do you think the goals are? And they knew them. If they'd seen the film, they knew what the goal was. They knew what Ariel and the Little Mermaid wanted. They knew what Elsa wanted. They knew what the character in Brave wanted. I even checked this out with my daughter, who was 3 at the time, and I asked her about the book Stickman we were reading, and I said, what does Stickman want? What's his goal? She said, he wants to get back to the family tree. Now, you might not have had this actual label or this meta language explained to the students before, that these are called goals, but trust me, they know what they are. They've been watching TV, they've been reading books or being read to, and they've been to the cinema and watched lots of films. They know what goals are because they're such a staple of storytelling. Again, another problem with no goals. Now, I won't read all of this, but this is classic sort of writing. So the sun peeking through the curtains, Alex stretching and yawning, his breakfast, the bowl of cereal, a glass of orange juice. So many children's stories start with him having breakfast. He eats his breakfast, toothpaste. I'll leave it there for to read. And actually, all of a sudden, by the end, he gets to school and it's been attacked by dinosaurs. Now, once again, this sort of writing has no clear goals. If we had a really nice clear goal, then absolutely no reason to have any of this build up with the breakfast and the toothpaste in the story whatsoever, because it's adding nothing to the story. A lack of goals will also mean other problems. What will your characters talk about if they don't have a goal? The weather? Football? What will they think about or feel without a goal? What will you get them to do in the story if they have no goal? How will you introduce obstacles without goals? Now, there's actually 2 types of goal, and I've called these a macro goal and a micro goal. And you need to think about them on a macro and micro level. So a bigger plot goal, that's a macro goal. What is the overall big goal of your character? Defeat the Empire, like Star Wars, escape from the dinosaurs in the theme park, Jurassic Park, or find the Holy Grail, Indiana Jones. But also, we have micro goals, little scene goals or goals over a chapter, or of just a few paragraphs, or sometimes over a sentence. What does my character want in this scene? Every scene in your story should be driven by your character wanting something which is met by an obstacle. So it might be that your character's trying to get through a locked door. They might be trying to get past a guard. They might be trying to convince someone of something. There's hundreds of different ideas for this, but it's really important, even just in a small scene, that we have this story shape and this idea of a goal with struggle and obstacles and payoff. Tips for teachers, and this is from my book, Teaching Story Writing in Primary. So lots of mini goal ideas here for you to use in class: getting an object, finding objects, convincing characters, getting to places, and so on. In fact, these goals actually were based on an interview, or some of these goals actually were based on a famous example based on an interview by Alfred Hitchcock. We call them the MacGuffin. And the MacGuffin is like this mythological Scottish creature that people were looking for. And actually you'll notice in some films, such as Guardians of the Galaxy, they call the actual object they're searching the MacGuffin, because the writers are sort of having a little meta joke there about it. Now, tip number 4: struggle, conflict, and stuff getting in the way of the goals. How can we actually teach this? It's really quite simple for young authors to get the idea of goals, but how do we get stuff in the way of them? So, one of the main problems we have is that we use this planning tool. It's called the Story Mountain. I've used it myself, and I'm sure you've used it in class, or seen people use in class, or are aware of it at least. Now, there's a problem with the Story Mountain, which can be used effectively sometimes. The main problem here is it's actually based on Freytag's 5-act structure. And you will see here, so here's a typical story plan from a student. A girl at home eating cornflakes, that's the opening. A build-up, an alien spaceship crashes in her garden. Dilemma, the girl has to decide whether to fight the alien. Resolution, the girl fights and defeats the alien. Ending, everyone is happy again, she goes back to her cornflakes. Now, what you'll quite often find is that students will plot out a novel's worth of ideas on this structure, which is what it's meant to be for quite a long form story, and therefore this leads to pacing problems. We have all read the story that is one long, breathless, run-on sentence because the students have tried to get from the beginning up the story mountain and down again in the time to finish the story in 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages maybe in year 6, and to get out for break, and therefore they have massive pacing problems. Here's an example of a story that might be written from this story mountain. Once upon a time, there was a girl who was very clever, and her name was Julie, and she was eating cornflakes. Then a giant big alien spaceship crashed into the garden. She ran out, and a big, ugly alien jumped out with a ray gun and said, "I'm going to kill you." So she decided to fight it, and got her spoon and jabbed it into his big purple eye, and it exploded into goo. She went back into the house, and her mum said, "Well done, would you like some toast?" And they all sat down, watched Holmes Under the Hammer, and lived happily ever after. So you can see here, this has got pacing problems. The pace is far too fast. Although we have obstacles, there's no struggle, so therefore no payoff. Now, you can actually work with different story shapes and models to plan. So for example, I've designed this story shape, which I call a mini story shape, like a try, fail, succeed. So this is something where your character has a goal. Let's say, for example, that they're trying to get past a guard into a house. And you can see here in the story that they will try to do this, and then they will fail. And then at some point, they'll have to work out how to get around this problem, and then they succeed. And this can be applied to all sorts of things in hundreds and hundreds of different stories. Now, once I plotted this little story shape out, when I was doing whole class reading, or reading my class book to the class, or we were doing some writing, students in my class started to spot it and said, "Oh yeah, no, this is a try, fail, succeed." And in movies you're watching, in TV you're watching, they can see this little story shape happen time and time again. Now actually, if I teach my students how to do this, that means that they can add, with their goal, a bit of struggle and a bit of payoff. And actually there's lots of different shapes as well. It might be try, succeed and fail. It might be try and fail and then succeed much later on. And you can start to really draw these out and draw the attention to the students and help them to shape their writing across a scene, a paragraph, a few scenes, a chapter, or perhaps a longer story. Teach them how to build it in. Teach them how to build conflict, tension and struggle. So here's an example. I was outside my house when it exploded. Kaboom! Then the police came and they thought I had done it, so they chased me and I ran into the woods. In the woods I found a cave to hide in, and I ran into the cave and I saw a lion and I fought it and I won. It's got exploding house, a police chase, a lion. So why doesn't it work? I could fill it with description of fancy words, but it's still not going to work even if I fill it with words from my thesaurus and a variety of sentence structures. It isn't about adding more detail. I see this as one of the most common pieces of feedback, written feedback or verbal in lessons that I'm observing. And they say, "Well, why don't you add more detail?" So let's try adding more detail to this story. The sun, a radiant celestial orb, beamed its golden rays upon the earth, casting a warm and comforting glow on the landscape. The fluffy white clouds resembling cotton candy suspended in the vast expanse of the azure sky seemed to frolic joyfully as if participating in a celestial dance. Tufts of white streaked behind them like the elegant brushstrokes of an artist painting the canvas of the heavens. I stood outside my mock Tudor house, an architectural masterpiece that mimicked the grandeur of a bygone era. The meticulously crafted details, meticulously designed to emulate Tudor aesthetics, adorned the exterior with an ornate charm. Then the house exploded. So adding more detail arguably made it worse, I think. It did. It made it worse. So, goal. What does your character want? Conflict or obstacle, the things that get in the way of your character's goals, and tension, the promise that something's going to get in the way of your character's goals, and the feeling that they may fail when facing conflict, so that when they do achieve it, there is payoff. By payoff, I mean the reader goes, "Hooray, fantastic, I'm so pleased with this character that I've grown to love and the goals that they're fighting against, that they've managed to succeed." There are lots of different types of conflict. Students will often think about conflict as punching each other, but actually there's internal conflict. The character's conflicted about what to do or scared of the thing they have to do. A common thing in writing is they will put the character's greatest fear in front of them. Remember Indiana Jones and the snakes? Relationships. So person versus person, an argument with another character, or one character wants to do something the other doesn't. Could be the situation they're in, they're locked in a room, lost in a forest, or have no money. You could have the person versus the natural world. So maybe they'd be stuck in a scorching sun in the desert, or a terrifying encounter with a grizzly bear. The fear, there's the Indiana Jones example. Or horrible surprise, like giant rolling boulders, aliens with laser guns, or plants with deadly mind-altering spores. And I love this part. As a writer, you can throw a hand grenade you want into any scene, even literally if you want. Be inventive and have fun with it. I always tell my class, you are playing God at this moment, and you can be as horrible as you want to your characters and put them through the most awful experiences, and it's actually fun, which sounds quite sadistic, but there you go. Okay, last point, number 5. How to teach the writing bit. Now by this I mean actually the part where you actually get the modelling, the writing, the shared writing. So this is how to ignore the lists and think about the basics. So what are the basics? We're talking about learning to write sentences, learning to link these sentences into compositions or stories in this case, so the compositional aspect, knowing why they are writing sentences and how to use them effectively in a story, and giving our pupils the knowledge to apply what they've learned independently. Always discussing the why. In every writing lesson, pupils need to hear the teacher's reasons for the why. I'm not going to just model a sentence and then get them to have a go. They're going to hear why I did what I did first. What was my reason for using this word here? Adding a description here, shortening my sentences here. Story writing is a craft, and it's one that needs to be made as explicit as possible. Along with this, I will add variation. I might discuss actually a compositional aspect, such as I'm going to start this with a sound, or I'm going to start this with an action, I'm going to start this with a bit of description, I'm going to start this with a thought. But actually, I could start it with an action, and I might then go to the sights and the sound. So I'm always talking about choices. So therefore, when I commit to my shared write, my students can see actually that there are several other or many other opportunities or variations that they can make in their own writing as we're starting to move them towards independence. There are actually just 4 choices of story writing. Action, things that happen. Description, so settings, characters, objects and senses. Introspection, that's the thoughts and the feelings, and the dialogue. And that's it. There are no other sentence types in story writing. That's it. Every book, every story is made up of these 4 different things blended together in different ways. Now, some books and stories and authors lean much more heavily on dialogue. I think Sally Rooney is a fantastic author that uses a lot of fantastic dialogue. And some authors really rely on action description, something of authors like Tom Clancy, who personally I don't think is such a fantastic writer, but there we go. Sorry, Tom Clancy, I doubt you're watching this. And actually, if you have a preference, you've lent someone a book and they come back and say, I didn't like it. Well, maybe that's because that person has a preference for action and description rather than introspection and dialogue. Now, what I will do is I will deconstruct this. So, for example, I might give them a little passage from a book. Josh could hear the shouts from above. Water filled his mouth. His back scraped against the rocks. He looked around him in panic. The wreck of the ship sat on the seabed. Its mast snapped in half. Its hull rusted black from its years in the salty oceans. Josh swam for the surface, but his heavy boots dragged him down. He cursed himself. Why hadn't he taken them off before diving in? Then we can examine the text to see which of the 4 writing lenses it is written through. So for this one, for example, starts with description, shouts from above, then has some action, seawater filling his mouth, some description, the wreck of the ship, action, swim for the surface, and introspection, cursing himself. Then I'll show them how to put this back together. Now, I used to know how to teach this, I thought, because what I used to do is say, here we go, here's a big block of setting, a big block of character, and a big block of dialogue, and I would try to link the stories together in this way. The problem with this is this isn't how stories are written. Yeah, sure, you might have 2 or 3 setting description paragraphs at the opening of a story to set the scene or world build, but actually generally they don't work in blocks like this. They're much more fluid. They work through action, description, introspection and dialogue, perhaps even in the same paragraph as we just saw in that last example. So instead, I will talk about constructing in this way. I might start with an action, move to a thought, description and then an action. And I would explain what I'm doing here. I'm going to start with an action to grab my reader's attention. I'm then going to capture my character's thoughts here to build tension. I'm going to use a description to describe the drop to build suspense, and then action, I'm going to add another action to keep up the pace of the scene and build excitement. Then I'll model to put it all together in a shared write. Verity sprinted towards the edge of the building. There's my action. If I fall, I die, she thought. So you can see here how the thought has built up the tension. Here's the little bit of the struggle. As she got closer, she could see the vertiginous drop looming before her and the hard cobble streets below. So this description is purposely built to raise the stakes here and to build suspense. With a final burst of speed, Verity launched herself into the air and held her breath as she soared through the sky. So this final action here builds up the pace of the scene and excitement. We might also then go back to sentences. Here's an example from my previous book, Sentence Models for Creative Writing. So could this be really happening, thought Theseus? Or I could map it out in a sentence frame. What is the thought and who thought it? And this building blocks of writing, teaching the sentences through this audience purpose, I believe is really powerful. Now, there's my quick 5 tips. Going forward, if you'd like to reach out for any more help or any advice, you can reach me here on my email, which is chrisjules@hotmail.com, or I'm also still on Twitter, X. I don't feel comfortable about that, but I'm still there for the time being. But my email address won't change. Most of these ideas are in my book, Teaching Story Writing in Primary, in much more detail with lots of practical examples. And if you've enjoyed or think that these interesting, then that book is available on the Bloomsbury website and other book selling services. Thanks very much, and please reach out if you'd like any help.